Hello. What does it take to recover from life-threatening illness and become a miracle-working medical missionary and world-renowned transplant surgeon? And how do you take a courageous stand for voiceless and defenseless residents in New York's poorer communities, despite having meager financial resources and limited staff? In this second and final episode on Dr. Clive Orville Callender and the Honorable Judge Oswald Callender, you'll discover how they turned these obstacles into vehicles for success through their deep faith in God. After growing up on the streets of Harlem, New York, the Callender twins attended Hunter College, but they took very different paths to get to medical school and law school. Clive's tumultuous childhood got worse before it got better. As a teenager, he contracted tuberculosis, a contagious lung disease. As his condition worsened, the only alternative was to surgically remove one of his infected lungs. During that experience, he met black doctors for the first time. They reminded him of the medical missionaries that had inspired him during their visits to the Ebenezer Gospel Tabernacle. One day, while recovering in a sanatorium, Clive had an epiphany. He thought, "I want to become a medical missionary." That became his dream, his purpose, and his life's calling. After graduating from high school, Callender received his Bachelor of Science degree in chemistry and physiology from Hunter College. He went on to study medicine at Maye Medical College in Nashville, Tennessee, where he received his MD degree in 1963. He completed a series of residencies at Harlem Hospital and later became an instructor at Howard University. In 1970, Callender got his chance to become a medical missionary at Nigeria's Port Harcourt General Hospital. It was during the country's bloody Biafran Civil War. During those traumatic 9 months, Callender contracted malaria, but despite the illness that wreaked havoc in his body, he pursued his calling. One day, under a battlefield tent, as heavy rains and enemy shells fell around him, Callender conducted a surgical procedure reminiscent of the creation story. He carefully removed a section of cancerous bone from the patient's infected jaw and replaced it by grafting another piece of healthy bone from the man's rib. The patient lived, but if Callender was to do the same, he had to return to the States to receive treatment for malaria, which was taking its toll. In subsequent years, Dr. Callender studied organ transplant medicine. In 1973, he founded the Howard University Hospital Transplant Center. His rate of successful surgeries eventually exceeded the national average for all kidney transplant surgeries. He later founded a successful kidney and liver transplant center in the U.S. Virgin Islands. Today, he and his wife Fern live in the suburbs of Maryland. He continues to save lives through the National Minority Organ Tissue Transplant Education Program, known as MOTEP, which received $1.2 million in funding from the National Institutes of Health to encourage organ donation, particularly from people of color. After graduating from Howard University Law School, Carl Callender set his sights on the legal profession. But rather than climb the proverbial corporate ladder of a prestigious Midtown law firm, he intentionally carved out his own courageous path. He went into the urban trenches where people who were poor and disenfranchised lived. In the process, he successfully persuaded many of those white-gloved attorneys to volunteer their pro bono services to these communities. In the mid-1970s, Callender founded the Community Law Office, a volunteer project that provided legal help from members of some of New York City's finest law firms for people who could not afford to pay. The program, with offices located in Brooklyn and Harlem, was funded through the East Harlem Model Cities program. Despite lacking access to polygraph tests, psychiatrists, and other typical tools of the legal profession, Callender's team consistently handled 10 new cases per day and kept 95% of his clients from going to jail in criminal cases. In one case, a judge ordered his removal from the courtroom for his passionate and relentless defense of a client. On the other hand, his exuberant laughter during other tense negotiations became legendary. Callender also served as director of the Queen's Legal Services. The agency provided free legal help on cases involving housing, family, domestic violence, public benefits, income tax, employment, education, consumer rights, and economic development. In 1976, Callender was appointed as Deputy Commissioner of the Office of Evaluation and Compliance of the Department of Rent and Housing Maintenance of the City of New York. He was responsible for prosecuting landlords to ensure compliance with building maintenance and safety codes. He also organized and educated community-based management groups. He eventually became an ordained minister. In 1981, he went to Ghana, West Africa, with an all-black missions team. They covered the eastern region, spreading the gospel of Christ at a time of great political turmoil in that country. In the 1990s, Callender became a housing court judge in the Bronx during a time when vastly increasing caseloads seemingly overwhelmed the system. News writers for the New York Times frequently wrote about Judge Callender's opinion on the need for more courtroom space. Today, the Callender twins are semi-retired. By the way, Dr. Clive Callender is an avid soloist, and despite his limited lung capacity, he renders the most beautiful songs of praise to God. The Honorable Carl O. Callender remains an enthusiastic and formidable player on the basketball court. It's been my pleasure to tell you these stories, And there are more stories out there, and the world is waiting for yours. Bye-bye.